Good morning. I'm Laura Lee Martin, Director of the Democratic Women's Club of Santa Cruz County's Legislative Director is what I am. And thank you for joining us for the Issues Forum today. Before we start the forum, we had a few announcements. I'd say the most important in my world right now is that we continue to enjoy the sanity of President Biden's administration and the programs he's promoting, and that the COVID reawakening is sort of refreshing. So it's nice to have some of that weight of the last year lifted off our shoulders. The DWC is also co-sponsoring a virtual fundraiser event for Jimmy Panetta on May 6th at 5 p.m. And there's information about this event on our website. We hope you'll consider joining us. There's a sliding scale to participate at $25 to $100, and you can co-sponsor at $250 if you're interested in doing that. And another announcement I have is our next forum is going to be on affordable housing on May 15th. So please watch for more information on that. Okay, today's forum is on the city and county budgets. And I don't think we have enough time in this hour to cover all this, but we're going to give it a go. The budgets of public agencies are the best way to understand what their priorities are. A budget is the most important decision made by a public agency. And an agency might pass an ordinance or approve an important program, but if they don't fund its implementation, it really doesn't mean a whole lot. So we want you to learn to watch the budget. We hope that you leave this forum knowing more about how you can advocate for budget expenditures that you think are important, what you would like your local government agencies to be spending your tax dollars on, and how you let them know that. Also let you know, and you might jot it down, I'll remind you at the end, the state controller's website has links to local government and information about budgets. So it's a good resource for things like this. Okay, our first speaker, who's still on mute, Martine Bernal, has been the city manager for Santa Cruz since 2010 and the assistant city manager for 13 years prior to that. And he's slated to retire this year. Congratulations, Martine.
Thank you.
His responsibilities have been to oversee the full service municipality with approximately 880 employees and an annual budget of $320 million. And prior to Santa Cruz, he worked for Mountain View and San Jose. He has a master's in public affairs at the University of Texas, Austin, LBJ School of Public Affairs, and a bachelor's in urban studies from Stanford. Thank you for joining us this morning, Martine.
Thank you. So I've prepared a PowerPoint that I'll share my screen if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Let me remind you, Mike, how long are we going to let our speakers speak? About 10 minutes?
No, they have, each of the speakers has about 20 minutes.
Oh, okay, you got it.
Okay, and Mike, would you mute everybody but our speakers?
I can't do that easily. I have to go through each person and do it. So we'll just ask people to mute themselves, I think.
Got it.
Okay, can you see this?
Yes, it's right on our screen. Thank you.
Okay, let me get this started here. Okay, so I thought I'd kind of give you an overview of our budget and how it's structured and what it encompasses, and then kind of give you a status of what our budget picture is currently and kind of projected into the future. So first, so I'm going to cover just quickly the city's financial structure, our budget process, overview of our revenues, expenditures, and our capital improvement program. That's the CIP. And then how we're dealing with the budget as far as our strategies and our challenges. So, so basically the way we operate our budget process is there's various pieces to it. It's as was noted, it's a process involving the city council and the public. So we try to approach it in an open and transparent process with public meetings, financial documents that are accessible to the public, lots of information. All of this is available online. We also have an OpenGov. It's called OpenGov website. It's actually a tool that the members of the public can, you just Google OpenGov Santa Cruz. We can actually go in and get historical data on the budget. You can drill down and get particular data on particular departments or particular expenditures, do charts, that sort of thing. So it's actually a useful tool for those who want to really delve into the budget and maybe even do some analysis. And of course, there's the whole public meeting process whereby the city manager is tasked with one of the principal duties of the city manager is to propose a budget that the city council then reviews during budget hearings and then ultimately adopts on an annual basis. There are also principles and guidelines that are established by various government accounting organizations that we follow in order to meet legal requirements and also just meet the standards. And our budget is reviewed and adopted every year and then awarded standards or declared to meet these standards every year. And we strive to do them, and we do every year. And in addition, we also have auditing processes that happen every year. And there's a variety of different council and administrative policies that are set by the council as far as how to allocate certain funds, how to structure certain funds, how to report certain expenditures, and so on and so forth that we meet and follow every year. And they're ongoing as the council deems fit and as those accounting practices change over the years. A lot of them have changed in recent years to make pension expenditures in particular more clear and more transparent so that the general public understands its impacts and what it actually means on an ongoing basis. That's just one example. And then we have, of course, our formal budget process as well, which incorporates our council strategic direction. The council adopts a strategic plan or priorities every year, and it varies from year to year. What we've done in the last year is really focused on dealing with the more immediate crises that we've faced, particularly with the pandemic and with recovery. And so we try to focus the budget to try to meet those goals and priorities. Although, you know, it's an iterative, ongoing process because you just can't change from one direction to a complete opposite direction within a year. But nonetheless, we try to adjust and try to direct the budget priorities and expenditures towards those goals. A lot of them are ongoing and do take time, like infrastructure and addressing some of the larger city issues that we face, like housing and, for example, and homelessness. And largely as a city, a lot of what we do is infrastructure, and you'll see when I get into the structure of the budget that a lot of our budget is a local government agency. We largely do infrastructure and those direct services that people feel in touch every day. You know, the streets, lights, the parks, the water, sewer, that sort of thing. As far as the budget cycle is concerned, it really starts early in the year with, actually it starts the previous year. I guess I'll start with the council establishing goals and priorities. And they usually do that early in the year, October through February. If we have a new council, council changes in November, then obviously the new council gets involved when they come aboard, typically by January. And then we use that as a guide to begin the budget development process internally with the departments. We also look at the forecast, anticipate what are going to be the issues that are going to impact revenues and expenditures, and develop a budget. Start developing a budget. We also in February do a mid-year review, sort of looking back at the previous or the budget that's in place at the time, seeing how it's going, whether it's meeting what we had projected and anticipated, make adjustments as necessary, corrections, and then do an update to the forecast and give a preview of what might come with the budget for the next fiscal year. Then in May, which is coming up here in a few weeks, you'll see a proposed budget. So we're currently in this mid-development process right now. The budget gets proposed, and then the public budget hearings begin, whereby the council reviews the budget. The departments will provide presentations to the city council. The council will take public input, and they'll give us input into the budget process. It may say we want to see more of this or less of that, or we have questions about this and we want you to look at this, and so on and so forth. And then we bring back the budget by the end of June so that the council can then adopt a budget for the next fiscal year. And so that's generally the way the budget cycle works every year. There are times when and that has happened, when we do face things that affect the budget pretty severely, and we have to do off-cycle budget adjustments and changes. And we've had to do a bit of that with the pandemic, for example, when we were hit with just a drastic reduction in revenues when the pandemic hit last year around this time. And we needed to sort of react to that as quickly as possible. As far as the overall structure of our budget, just very briefly, there's really three kind of principal ways to think of it. And it's based on what we call funds. We're structured into different funds. There's three groupings of funds that we have. The first is governmental funds, which are used to account for tax-supported activities. So we have activities that are supported by taxes, and that's generally our general fund. Those are things like the sales tax, the property tax, we have a admissions tax, we have a parking tax, we have a utility tax. These are all taxes that support our general programs and our general funds. And then we also have some special revenue funds that are dedicated for particular uses within that. Our capital investment program, which is our funding for capital, which is very reduced at this point. We don't really do much of that. And any debt service that we may have. We don't have a whole lot of debt, but we do some. We've, for example, issued debt to, we leverage some of our sales tax revenue from Measure H that the voters approved in 2005, for example, for street improvement purposes. We leverage that to issue debt in order to get a lot of street work done and pay for that early, and then pay it off over time, so we can get ahead of the street repair work that needs to be done to keep our streets in as good a shape as we can. Then we have what are called proprietary funds, and those are restricted in a sense that the revenues collected for those purposes have to be used for those purposes. And those are largely our enterprise funds, which are, the biggest one is water. So and those are generally collected through rates. So when you pay your water bill, that goes to pay for water service, both the distribution and the supply of water. But those funds can only be used for those purposes. You can't use water funds to pay for parks or to pay for streets or any general governmental purposes. Same with the solid waste fund, the parking fund. Those are some of the larger ones that we have, sewer fund. Then we have some internal service funds that are intended to cover some operational needs, like our workers' compensation fund, our liability fund. We also have some others related to replacement of vehicles and equipment as well that have specific restricted purposes to support the infrastructure or the operations. And then we also have some fiduciary funds, which account for really to support some custodial or what are called trustee purposes. And they don't directly support the operations. They're more indirectly support that. A couple of the larger ones are their pension trust funds, which is a way to really leverage our ability to pay down our pension obligations into the future. It's a way to have a source of funds there to cover those future obligations or ensure that we're able to cover them moving forward. We have some retiree, for example, medical pay that we have. And then in addition, we have our largest ones with our investment trust funds. All other funds have fund balances, and so we put them in investment portfolios and invest those for the purposes of leveraging, obviously, all those, like you do your savings accounts and other things to benefit the various funds, whether it's a general fund or some of the enterprise funds. We have an investment portfolio or pool for those purposes. So as far as where the money comes from, I mentioned some of these, but I'll go over some of the major ones. So this is really as it relates to the general fund. And we tend to spend a lot of time with the general fund, largely because that is where we base many of our challenges. And the reason for that just really has to do with the fact that the general fund relies on taxes, as you see here, and fees, but largely taxes. And taxes are really they're really in terms of how much we receive and how they're impacted, they really relate to the economy and to outside factors. The city council has relatively little control over these revenue sources, unlike the enterprise funds where their rates, the city council can set rates, can adjust rates, so they tend to be more stable, whereas these revenue sources rely on the overall status of the economy. And obviously what we've been going through with the pandemic is a great example of that, where we saw in particular the hotel tax and some of the other taxes like the admissions tax related to tourism and people visiting just plummet overnight and dramatically. And so this revenue source just tends to be less stable. And in order to adjust these, they require a vote of the people. And that's why you see the focus on ballot measures, revenue measures to support the general fund, which supports largely, and you'll see later, public safety and parks and recreation. But these are our major revenue sources. Property tax is the largest, and it's one of the most stable since we have a pretty stable real estate and housing market from the revenue perspective. Sales and use tax is the second largest, and that one was impacted somewhat from the recession, not as severely as our hotel tax, which is the transit occupancy tax, and our admissions tax, which really plummeted. And then we have a variety of other sources and fees and permits that are issued. Fees and permits, the largest ones there are really the development fees and permits that people pay for development activities, permits for building and construction, for example, that sort of thing. And our general fund then really, and then there's grants and other things like that. But this is our general fund, which is about $100 million. Where the money goes towards overall, as I noted earlier, it was noted earlier about the city's overall budget. It's $323 million. The general fund is about the $100 million overall. And then the enterprise funds are about $167 million overall, and you see that here. And you can see that really, actually, the enterprise funds are about half of our overall budget. The general fund operating is more like 30%. Then we have the other funds here too. So we are, again, a lot of times gets spent discussing the general fund as far as the budget situation, deficits, and impacts to services. But a big part of what we do are enterprise funds and infrastructure and public utilities, which obviously there's a lot of issues around those, around water supply and that sort of thing, but not necessarily around the fiscal conditions because they're more stable. As far as the general fund expenditures and where they go to, as I alluded to earlier, the largest expenditures are really in public safety, with police at 27%, fire at 19%, parks and recreation is at 14%, 13.1 million. And these really are the big three. And so whenever we have budget issues and deficits, these are the ones that tend to be impacted the most. Public Works, even though it's our largest department, it's largely comprised of enterprise funds. And so the general fund budget is pretty small. And of the budget that they do have, a lot of it is in streets and some of those funds. We've, even though they're general fund revenues, there's been a commitment to dedicate those to streets per the ballot measures that were approved by the voters. And then planning and community development, again, a lot of those are supported by revenues from development fees too. So they do have a source of revenue for that, but they are a general fund operation. City manager budget might seem large, but it's a bit deceptive because it also includes funding for community programs and community services. And that's a little over 2 million of this, about half of it. It also includes the city clerk, animal services. The city manager piece of it is a little over $1 million, actually. So most of this is other programs and services. And then you see the other operating departments here too. Economic development used to be a larger when we used to have a redevelopment agency. It had a budget of closer to $14-15 million a year. And that's how much it was reduced. And a lot of that was for capital investments and for projects, and so particularly housing. So that was a big blow to our ability to move forward with housing development and capital projects, particularly to leverage a variety of different public projects and public improvements.
Martine, you should point out
Yeah.
the redevelopment funds were taken away. They used to exist in large numbers, and then the state closed the redevelopment programs in California. So it wasn't our choice. It wasn't our choice.
That's right. That's right. A few years ago, about I guess it's been a little bit less than 10 years ago, the state of California, largely, because of their budget situation, only had the Great Recession, and also because of some abuse that was done by some cities, redevelopment was eliminated. Some cities did abuse redevelopment revenues. They used them for non-economic development purposes. They used them to subsidize their general fund. We did not. However, those bad apples and the economic situation caused the state to just eliminate redevelopment. There's talk about trying to bring it back because it did have an impact on the overall development of housing in the state of California. And as you all know, there's been issues around the housing availability and housing market. So it was a big blow to certainly the city of Santa Cruz and our ability to move forward with redevelopment, and economic development was largely again to support lower income areas and areas that really needed improvement, like the downtown. We continue to dedicate those revenue sources that continued, because there were some property taxes that still continued, and we decided to continue to dedicate those towards economic development. So we do have those. And then I think it was in 2011 or 12, the voters also approved a 1% increase in our hotel tax, which resulted in a additional fund for economic development purpose. And we call that the Economic Development Trust Fund. So even though it's a general purpose measure and it was general purpose revenue, we do dedicate that for economic development purposes. That's by way of example, one of the projects that's on the council agenda for Tuesday is to fund a program to assist businesses downtown with respect to accommodating the new reality of particular restaurants, of how to conduct business outside. And so it's to do, and also we have a lot of vacancies downtown as a result of the pandemic and the changing economy. And so it's a program to try to promote pop-up businesses in the downtown in these vacant parcels or vacant buildings, properties. And we're using the Economic Development Trust Fund to fund some of those programs. Our capital investment program, it is by far and largely in the enterprises at this point, principally water. We have a very large water capital improvement program right now as a result of the fact that we have a water system. We're one of the few cities, certainly the only one of our size, that is a full service city with respect to water. We do both the water supply and the water distribution. Most cities they buy water from a water purveyor or a water resource agency, and then they deliver it, or they have a separate water agency do it. But in our case, we do both. And so we have to invest in all that infrastructure to support that, the dam and the reservoir and the pipelines and so on and so forth. The other is public works. A lot of public works capital improvement program is non-general fund. It's grants. It's other revenue sources for streets is a big part of it, as well as the sewer system, as well as the wastewater treatment plant, which is a regional wastewater treatment plant that we operate for the region. And then what's remaining is really woefully underfunded and inadequate, and that is for our park system. We really don't invest what we really should with respect to parks and some of our other facilities, like our fire facilities, our police facilities, our community facilities, community centers, the civic auditorium, just public facilities in general. The library system is not here because it's a separate joint powers authority. although the city does allocate funding from our general fund towards it, and there are some revenue bonds that are available for that, but it's not really part of the picture here. And there's a lot of money right now being spent on library system capital as a result of the bond that was approved by voters. We have a lot of unfunded projects in the city, and this yellow donut shaped here thing kind of gives you a sense of what those might be. A lot of them are in the transportation arena, as well as I mentioned, some of these other areas. So with respect to our budget status and where we're at, this current fiscal year, the biggest impact has been as a result of the pandemic. We were on a path to fiscal stability as we were heading into this current year. Last year, we actually were looking at revenue sources and balancing our budget, but the budget picture was relatively positive, and then the pandemic hit, and it was just much more significant than anything I've ever seen. Certainly more significant than the Great Recession in terms of how it hit Santa Cruz in particular. As a result, we had to make take some actions to really keep the bleeding from happening, because we lost, overnight we lost $10 million in revenues. Plus, we've lost approximately over $20 million in revenues as a result of the pandemic thus far. But we implemented the hiring freeze, we reduced personnel costs, we did a furlough of employees, we did an early incentive program, volunteer program, time off program, deferred CIP projects, and anything that we could, just really try to keep spending really low, as low as possible, try to leverage revenues. We used quite a bit of our reserves for that purpose. Luckily, we've had good fiscal policy in that regard, and we do keep adequate reserves. And it's the first time in my career we had to use reserves so quickly and so dramatically. And even with all of that, we still had to make some budget reductions of about $5 million. So it was incredibly painful and difficult for the city, something much more severe than I'd ever seen, and then probably the city's ever experienced. Moving into next year, one of the things that I mentioned earlier, the council did do is to implement a interim recovery plan. We call it Re-envision Santa Cruz, and as part of that is fiscal stability. And so there is a strategy there to sort of provide recovery and stability moving forward to recover from the impacts of the pandemic. We received some federal stimulus. I should note that one of the things that is particularly challenging for Santa Cruz is that we are a city that was severely impacted by the recession as a result, as I noted, because of our tourism-based economy. And so other cities that didn't have the level of tourism that we do weren't impacted as severely, like, for example, like Watsonville and some other more suburban cities. They don't have the level of TOT revenues, they don't have admissions tax, they don't have a parking tax, they don't have all these general fund revenue sources that were severely impacted. At the same time, where relatively the funding that was given to the feds, from the feds to the city, is based on poverty levels. It's a CDBG formula, and obviously we do have some of that, but we're not as, don't have the same level of poverty as, say, Watsonville, some other cities. So it was sort of a double impact for us. We don't, because we're a relatively affluent city, we received a lesser amount, but because we're a tourism city, we had a more severe impact. So the funding that we received was closer to 15 million. And as I mentioned earlier, the impact to us was more like $20 million as far as just revenue losses alone. Whereas some other cities are in a better position where, like for example, Watsonville is receiving 18 million more than we are, and understandably so as a result of their poverty rate. However, they weren't impacted as severely as we were in terms of the revenue losses. So they're actually able to use some of that stimulus funding to cover additional programs and to do other things that we're just not able to do, unfortunately. The same thing happened with the first set of stimulus funding that we received from the feds back in December that went to the state. We're considered a small city, and so we received funding at the small city level. However, we have big city expenses that a lot of cities don't have, such as the impact of homelessness and some of the other impacts that we have as a result of being the county seat. And so,
Martine,
yes,
I just want to interrupt for a minute, Mike, checking time. This is very interesting, but I'm getting drawn into it, but I also want to check our time, Mike.
Yeah, we should probably see if we can wrap it up in about 5 or so minutes, Marky.
yeah, I think that's really it. I've got this one
Okay.
more slide and that's it. So anyway, so that's been a challenge for us. We're looking at for fiscal recovery, we do need to, we have a structural deficit that we're facing, which means that our expenditures are outpacing our revenues. So we do need to look at increasing our fiscal stability, which means additional revenue sources or reducing services or a combination of both. And so we're looking at everything that we can to really provide for fiscal stability. And then finally, as far as just some of the challenges that we have that we're able to not keep up with, and that is with respect to infrastructure. Obviously, we've focused on trying to maintain essential services and to keep those going. And so the capital budget has really suffered as a result. Over the years, what we set aside for capital has dwindled to almost nothing. And so we're not able to keep up with being able to replace some of our basic infrastructure, like our fleet, our parks facilities, I noted, and some of the other infrastructure, and also with respect to downtown. And then we have a very large impact with respect to homelessness services that we face with respect to cleanups and hygiene stations and other programs and things that we need to implement in order to try to mitigate the impact of homelessness in our community. And that's really it. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Martine. That was a lot of information and very informative. I wanted to acknowledge, Andrea, I see your hand raised, and what I didn't mention at the beginning is we're going to save the Q&A till the end. So, Andrea, if this is something that can wait, will you please lower your hand? And if it stays up, then we'll let you break in maybe on the chat. I think, Mike, you've enabled the chat on the side.
Yes, you know, the chat is open and people can write comments, and we'll be looking for our first questions to our speakers from the chat, and then we'll take questions from people raising their hands.
Perfect. Thanks, Andrea. Okay, thank you very much. So our next speaker is Donna Myers, the mayor of Santa Cruz, and she was elected to the city council in 2018. Her focus as mayor this year is to shed light on the need for the intentional building of a green economy and green jobs in the city of Santa Cruz. Her career has been focused on environmental conservation, including water quality improvement, habitat restoration, and many other issues like that. She's currently also the general manager of the Salinas Valley Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency. If you'll recall, our city council members and mayor are doing this part-time. She has a bachelor's of science in biology from UCSC and a master's in urban and regional planning from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Thank you, Donna, for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Laura Lee. Yeah, I thought that Martine did such a thorough job. I think we sort of get the certainly the nuts and bolts, and then also sort of the difficulties of the budget forecast that we see ahead, but also some glimmers, I think, of hope. The one thing that I would mention to everyone is that right as the pandemic kind of hit the council, last year's council did approve a budget model that was developed through a government agency, a government assistance agency called Management Partners. And that model, I think, was really instrumental in helping us chart how the different parts of COVID-19 impacted the budget as we moved through the year. So we were able to literally, upon closures, put in different factors, and Martine and the finance staff really were just on a monthly basis. It was that much where the variability in trying to track that. Management Partners, as I mentioned, is sort of a government services type of business. And the other thing that was happening was that there was comparables going on across the state of California. So they focus specifically on building these models. And as you know, every city has a slightly different piece to their budget. We are very heavy, obviously, on enterprise funds. But we also provide a lot of community service that some cities don't. So it was very helpful to have really a real-time model that we continued to look at and manipulate as we move towards preparing an interim recovery plan that the council took action on later in the year. And that was really informed both by this budget model, but also by some of the major initiatives that were starting to come up in the city. And instead of keeping those as separate pieces, we really recognized that those were things that could lift us out of the pandemic impacts and further sort of show a policy direction for the community. And so I think what I'll do is do a little bit of a deeper dive on that this morning, because that does sort of set the framework and the policy framework that the city council adopted in, it was really in the late fall, as we started to really think through how are we going to recover, what are going to be the areas that are going to need extra attention, what are the kinds of projects that are going to be coming through. And so I will let you all know that there is a update on the interim recovery plan for this coming Tuesday on the city council, but on the city council agenda. That should be happening sometime in the late afternoon. There's a very extensive document in the agenda packet, which of course is available online, but it's a good little document. There was, we worked with, again, management partners as a consultant to really help us prepare that. It's an 18 to 24 month plan, but it really kicks off some, what I think of as some decadal long types of projects that I think we see. Those of you who were here after the earthquake, we saw these sort of decadal kinds of approaches that eventually came through our community. And so it's a very similar kind of approach that was done after the earthquake. Of course, the earthquake, we knew the physical impacts of that, and we were able to identify the needs for the repair of those physical impacts. COVID is a little bit of an unknown, obviously, and it could impact us in ways that we just can't even really forecast into the future. Similarly, we also just, stated put into place a stage 1 water emergency. Well, similar to COVID, if we do run out of water, we're not going to have our hotels open either. So again, or a wildfire, as Laura Lee knows, can be very destructive to a community and its economy. So I think as a city council, we're starting to look at issues in a much more complex world ahead of us. COVID being one of those things that no one could have imagined coming out of somewhat out of left field, but acknowledging that these kinds of disruptions to our communities and society may be coming even more frequently. And certainly Ryan's been living that for the last year with his district so devastated by the fires. So what I thought I would do just briefly is give you just a very high level of that. And then I know we have some time constraints, so I want to make sure we've got time for Ryan and Nicole. Let me just share a bit of the funner part of the interim recovery plan, which basically is a great little graphic, and just kind of walk you through the main aspects of it. And then again, I would suggest that, if you can take a look at this plan, it is in the city council agenda packet this week. So Martine mentioned this is sort of the policy driver, as everyone knows. Martine guides the city as the city manager, and really the policy framework is set by the city council. And again, this plan was developed over several months with a council subcommittee consisting of myself, former mayor Martine Watkins, and current mayor Justin Cummings. We all worked on this together with city staff. We've named this Re-Envision Santa Cruz, and this is building with the tagline, building a future for everyone together. And we really have focused on 3 aspects. One is the infrastructure piece of what still continues to be a very important part of Santa Cruz, but we've expanded that to not just streets and roads and kind of what we would typically think of as infrastructure. The council was also very clear that our parks, recreation, and open spaces are important infrastructure as well. And that very much a green economy and workforce could become a real focus for our community, both with regards to those kinds of open spaces and needs, but also looking at the kinds of opportunities that our water department is bringing with various large capital projects, the importance of repairing and getting the wharf put back together, and the investment in, for example, trails and open spaces, the rail trail being a good example of that. And then really looking at infrastructure also from the aspect of resiliency, really understanding the impacts to infrastructure that may be coming from sea level rise and other types of things out on the horizon. So infrastructure was thought of in a very much more broader way than you would typically think of infrastructure. And Tiffany Weiss-West, our climate action manager, is really the lead, along with all the department heads, of sort of weaving the climate adaptation pieces into this infrastructure piece. The other, Martine touched on quite a bit, but it was really looking at downtown and business revitalization. As we know, this is where so much of what we realize in terms of economic recovery is going to be driven out of downtown, but also some of our smaller business districts as well. And so we looked at downtown reinvestment. We looked at the kinds of things that we have worked on over the years, but maybe have not gotten quite done yet. That includes for example, the River Parkway, still a very much an asset that we can continue to improve. Bringing additional investment in downtown through housing, through mixed use projects, and through bringing 2 new medical clinics, Dientes and Santa Cruz Community Health Center, with new facilities combined with 100% affordable housing. Also working with Metro Transit District to actually completely redo the transit center downtown to accommodate new natural gas buses as well as electric buses, and then really redesign that area so that we have more housing facing Front Street and having a brand new and modern state-of-the-art bus station that obviously complements there on the Front Street side. So, and then also finally in downtown, really putting into place public access areas through proposed housing, as well as connecting people up to the Riverwalk, and really starting to turn Front Street into a river facing type of neighborhood. So I think of this as not only downtown and reinvestment, but actually creating sort of a new neighborhood in Santa Cruz in our downtown adjacent to the river. A lot of focus from the council on affordable housing, but also recognizing and trying to work with market rate housing developers to be able to put affordable units in those types of housing units. It's hard for the city to build housing anymore because of the loss of redevelopment. So again, how do we make these relationships with market rate housing proposals and also try to get that affordability factor in as well? So downtown and business revitalization will be a big focus of the city council in the years ahead, and very much is built into this interim recovery plan from that perspective of really bringing a new neighborhood, additional housing, very needed housing to downtown Santa Cruz. And then finally, down here, fiscal sustainability, I think Martina did a very effective job of sort of telling you where we're going. We do have a revenue subcommittee of the city council as well. That is myself, former mayor Justin Cummings, and then vice mayor Sonia Bruner. We sit as a revenue committee looking at sort of the second item here, which is new and improved funding sources. We have adopted a legislative addenda for the city this year, which is looking at both federal and state funds. We regularly meet with state and federal electeds, Jimmy Panetta, Mark Stone, John Laird, as council members, and do that outreach. And we're also very much looking at opportunities potentially for the city to explore with trying to find additional revenues and doing that analysis now. And there will be more updates on that later in the summer as we start to narrow in on some potential ideas that we obviously will vet via the city council. So this is sort of our future. Again, it's 18 to 24 months, but I think it's putting in place some very key things that we can do that we will continue to see change in the community, but also very much driven by a recognition of climate change that is coming, as well as the kinds of things that the changes in downtowns that we're seeing around the nation. And then of course, the very great need for more affordable housing in our community. So I'll stop there, Laura Lee, and that way we'll have plenty of time for folks.
Great, Donna, thank you. That was very useful. And I like the logos.
Yeah.
Those are great. All right, so we're going to wrap up the city and move on to the county. And we're going to start with Nicole Coburn, who has been with the county for 8 years. She's currently the Assistant County Administrative Officer, and she participates in the preparation of the county's proposed and supplemental budgets. She oversees several countywide initiatives, including strategic planning and operational planning, and she supervises the county public information officer. I'm going to read these to you because I thought it was fascinating. Nicole has a lot on her plate. She supervises the county public information officer, the agricultural commissioner, Department of Child Support Services, Information Services, and serves on the Animal Services Authority board and is assigned to the Library Joint Powers Authority. She also oversees the transition of Indigenous Defense Services to the County Public Defender's Office. So she's got a full plate of activity. She holds a Master's of Public Policy from the University of California, Berkeley, and a Bachelor's of Arts in Communication Studies from UCLA. Thank you, Nicole, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Let me see if I can share my screen here. Oh, I am missing the share function.
It should be on the bottom down there. It should be.
Oh, share screen. Here we go. All right. I'm used to Teams, so.
There you go.
Always interesting. Okay, let's go to the. So I'm Nicole Coburn. I'm an Assistant County Administrative Officer. I'm joined today by Supervisor Ryan Coonerty, who's the 3rd District Supervisor. So together, hopefully we can answer your questions about the county budget and explain some of what is in there. So today's agenda, I'm going to cover the county's budget cycle initially and provide some information on points of public opportunities for the public to engage in our budget. I'm also going to cover mandated and municipal services that are provided by the county and go over some online and other budget resources. The county budget is quite large, as you know, so I'm going to give a really high-level overview of the county budget numbers and some of the primary county revenues and uses, and then touch on a few other things that you may want to know as you're learning about the county budget today. So this quote is one that I pulled out because I think it's a reflection of how we're trying to operate here at the county. A budget is more than just a series of numbers on a page. It is an embodiment of our values. For us at the county, the budget document is one of our main communications tool and serves as a policy document and truly does try to reflect our values and what we're trying to achieve. Our county budget presents an annual plan for providing services that make Santa Cruz County an excellent place to live and work. So here we have an overview of the county budget process. The State Budget Act and County Budget Guide, as well as our county strategic plan, really drive our budget policies and goals. Our budget process begins quite early. We typically send out instructions to departments in December of each year. Then they start to build their requested budgets for the subsequent year. They give those budget requests to our office starting at the end of January, going into February, and we start to work with them on those numbers and ask questions and refine those requests. That all leads us towards developing a proposed budget that we release at the beginning of May. And the public and the Board of Supervisors has a chance to weigh in beginning in June when we hold our public hearings. Subsequent to that, once a budget is adopted, we do have to go through all of the actuals for the fiscal year that closed and work on generating the adopted budget, the final adopted budget in September, October, that the auditor controller brings to the board, and that serves as our final budget document for the year. So there are multiple points in the process during which the public can engage with us, and that starts all the way back in December. Our office typically provides a preliminary status report to the board in December that talks about where we're at in the current fiscal year and then where we're headed in the new fiscal year. We usually update that forecast in January and present to the board as well. And then we give a final update during the February or March timeframe. These are all opportunities for the public to stay in tune with what's happening with the county in terms of our budget and a chance to comment and provide input. In addition, in May, like I mentioned, we have our published budget document. That's a chance for the public to read what we're proposing for the new fiscal year, and then in June to weigh in through our budget hearings. And again, in September, October, when we bring the final budget document for the year to the board, that's one final opportunity. I would note that the county is governed by the government code section, and so we're required to go to the board and have the board approve a budget by June 30th of each fiscal year so that we can have spending authority for the new fiscal year. We're also required to provide public notice of our budget documents. So we do that in advance of our budget hearings in June. And then the October 2nd deadline is the deadline by which the board must adopt that final budget and then file that with the state controller's office. So the county is unique in that we provide both mandated and municipal services. So there are three general categories of services that we provide. One is municipal services that we deliver only to the unincorporated area. This includes fire protection, law enforcement, planning services, road maintenance, parks, garbage, and sewer utilities. We also provide some municipal services to the unincorporated area as well as the cities. And those would include things such as elections, emergency preparedness, animal services, and libraries. Although those are JPAs, we do contribute to those, and those are provided countywide. The county has about half of our population in the unincorporated area, which makes us unique in that, in some regards, we're the largest city in the county. So a lot of these municipal services that cities provide, we're also providing. I just wanted to point that out. And then in terms of mandated services, we're required by the state and federal government to provide certain mandated services to all county residents. This includes a lot of the services in our Health and Human Services Department, including clinics, public and behavioral health, adult and long-term care, family and children's services, as well as some criminal justice programs, including adult and juvenile detention and criminal prosecution and indigent defense, just to name a few. So we have a lot of information online, and I encourage you all to go online and view our budgets. There's some really great interactive tools online that you're welcome to go look at. Our interactive budget tool is online at www.scbudget.com. There is the FAQ, a list of FAQs that are listed here that you might find useful to learn more about different aspects of our budget. I'm not going to go into all of them today because there's a lot to that, but you're welcome to go and view our FAQs. We also have budget documents for the past 15 years that you can find online. If you go to our main county website and then click on government, followed by budget and financial reports. As you're looking at our budget information, if you have any specific information or needs or requests, you're welcome to email them to us, and we have an email set up to field your questions, and that's easygovhelp@santacruzcounty.us. The auditor controller posts a number of other financial related information on the website, including our year-end audit reports, and other types of information. So lots of really useful things if you want to go onto our website. There's also a financial tool on the right-hand side of the screen here. You can see our financial search. In addition to the budget search, you can do a financial search, which will allow you to see our current year-to-date actuals. You can look at the current budget, adopted budget compared to the last year's adopted budget, and you can drill into different aspects of the budget, including salaries and benefits. If you want to see line item detail, you can drill down and see some of those specific numbers. So I encourage you to take a look at that. So let's take a look inside our budget. And like I mentioned, the county budget is quite large. So I'm going to look at this as a high level, but useful information in our proposed budget documents include our budget message, which comes from the county administrative officer. We also have a county profile that kind of gives an overall view of who lives in the county, some of our economic sectors, and various other information. We also have a description of our county strategic plan and other initiatives, as well as each individual section by department has detailed descriptions of information on those departments and programs within those departments. There's detailed budget information and trends. We have change charts by county department, so you can see what's changing within different revenues and expenditures. And then at the back of our proposed budget document, we have various financial summaries that provide a lot of the detail, including revenues and expenditures, the fund balance and reserve information. We also have personnel summaries, information on our capital improvement projects and county debt, and various other detailed schedules. So it's quite a large document, and that's available online. So our total budget for 2021 is getting close to $1 billion. It's currently around $971 million. The general fund portion of the budget is about $622 million. We currently have about 2,400 positions, the majority of which are in our Health and Human Services departments, followed by our safety departments. You can see there. We had significant revenue losses in 1920, and that fed into
2020, I see.
Yes, that fed into 2021. We had to make some really difficult decisions in order to balance our budget in 2021. You know, we ended up using about $14.2 million in reserves to balance our 2021 budget. We were able to do this because we had increased our reserves significantly. We had tripled them since 2011-12 in order to create a stronger financial footing for the county. The use of one-time reserves now puts us at about a 7% reserve level, which is below our board policy of 10%. We're hoping to build that back up over the next 5 to 7 years as we move forward and our revenues improve. In the current fiscal year, we were able to balance our budget by a combination of things. In some places, we may have increased some fees and charges to offset increased costs. I know we tried to moderate this because of the impact of the pandemic, but there may have been some fee increases in certain areas. We also work with departments to achieve various cost decreases related to non-essential services. We used available fund balance. We used available one-time funds, and we used our reserves. On the whole, how we balanced our budget, we think of it in terms of kind of equal splits between a third coming from our reserves, a third coming from solutions with departments that we were able to achieve departmental reductions, and then a third of it was achieved by, in coordination with the union, on implementing a 7.5% to 10% furlough. So in total, I mentioned we have about 2,400 staff across the department. So we've been working towards maintaining the county's fiscal stewardship over the last couple of years during the pandemic, with the support of the board and the community. Prior to the pandemic, we had achieved our goal of 10% of revenues, a reserve goal of 10% of revenues, And that helped us, like I mentioned, achieve and balance our budget in the current fiscal year by using some of those reserves. Over the past several years, we've improved our credit rating. We've also been able to reduce some of our pension obligations and reducing our structural imbalance to maintain that fiscal stewardship, as well as trying to maintain our overall employee growth. We've also started to tackle some of the deferred maintenance throughout the county. We've implemented some improvements here at 701, including some new solar installations to reduce energy costs, as well as trying to work on the expansion of some of our health clinics around the county, including down in South County. And we've been able to manage our limited resources during this difficult time. So for 2021, our adopted general revenue totals about, well, our general fund financing totals $622.5 million. Like I had mentioned, that funds all of our expenditures. Revenues are about 609 million of that, and we fund balance comprises the remaining 13 million. As seen here, Health and Human Services directly receives more than half of general fund revenues. The majority of revenues come from state and federal, the state and federal government for mandated activities. Our custodial revenues, which we also refer to as our general county revenues, these are the most discretionary revenues in the general fund. In 2021, our general county revenues total 153 million. The majority of which, or 138 million, are generated by taxes. And as you can see here, similar to what Martine had said with the city, property taxes comprise the majority of our tax revenue. Our discretionary general county revenues support the net county cost in our county general fund departments. Net county cost is the difference between the expenditures in those departments and their revenues. We also refer to this as our general fund contribution. So in 2021, our general fund contribution includes use of fund balance of 13 million plus 153 million in general county revenues for a total of 166 million. And I provided all these screenshots from the website just so you get a flavor for what is there, so that you can kind of go there and look at them if you want. But there are both pie charts and trend charts on the website. So if you want to look at some of our revenue sources over time, you can click on the option to look at the trend charts. And I pulled these out. These are three of our major general revenue sources. Property taxes, you know, there are two main deadlines for paying property taxes, so they fluctuate throughout the year depending on when we receive the property taxes in December or April. So you can see over time they're generally rising, but the cash flow does fluctuate. In terms of our sales tax, we've been trending slightly up, but it was slowing, and we saw a decline with the pandemic. So you can see that drop in 1920 from our base sales tax revenues. And then VLF fees, our vehicle license fees, have been steadily increasing as car sales have increased over time, and you can see the trend there. So in terms of our total spending for the county's budget, Health, Human Services, and the sheriff comprise the majority of our total budget at about 46%, and are about 60% of our total salaries. This is our total budget overall, so this includes all funds, including the general funds and other funding sources. The largest, the area with the largest allocation because of all the other funds that come into them is the Public Works and Sanitation. So just in terms of general fund spending on its own, Health, Human, and the sheriff comprise almost 3/4 of the general fund budget. 196 million goes towards health. Human Services is about 180 million, and then the sheriff is 82 million currently. I was hoping to show you and my plan was to go through the website and kind of drill into some of these areas, but I noticed it isn't functioning right now. So I've had a technical difficulty, so I apologize about that. I was hoping to drill down a little bit further. But that gives you a flavor of kind of where the bulk of our general fund budget is spent really on health, human, and the sheriff. So what's new in the county budget? So in March, we provided our 5-year general fund projection. You can see here, while we balanced our budget in 2021, and we're working on balancing our budget or we'll be able to balance our budget for 21-22. As we go into the out years, we are projecting some significant structural imbalance between our general fund financing and our general fund uses. As we head towards 25-26, we're projecting the gap is going to grow to about $13 to $15 million. Over this time, we've projected that revenues will grow on average about 3%, and you can see how that's trending from about $167 million to almost a little over $189 million. And then the orange line above that, the general fund uses, is also trending up on a similar trajectory of about 3% on average to provide that almost $15 million gap. We're going to have to work on trying to figure out how to close this gap, and we anticipate possibly having to pursue some revenue options and use some one-time funds as we move forward in order to try to lessen that projection and close that gap. For the good news is that for 21-22, the county has received an allocation from the President's American Rescue Plan Act. So the county is going to receive about $52.9 million. As you may know, this is going to be split into equal payments. So we expect to receive half of this amount this fiscal year and the second half next fiscal year. We recently presented to the Board of Supervisors on our ARPA allocation on April 13th. And we showed how of this amount, about $24.6 million is going to be going towards supporting our COVID-19 response costs in a variety of different areas. I think we have 45 COVID-19 response programs across 11 departments. We also have significant revenue losses that we're able to use some of these monies towards. So we're going to be using about $21.9 million towards general revenue recovery in the current and next fiscal year. And some of this will be used to help us eliminate our furlough in the next fiscal year. So approximately 11.4 million of that 21.9 will help us fully eliminate the furlough. We had worked with departments to create a number of scenarios for the new budget going into 21-22, including half a furlough elimination or full of furlough elimination. Our proposed budget is going to show how departments are achieving a 50% furlough elimination. And then with this ARPA allocation, we're going to be backfilling the rest to fully eliminate the furlough. So that's really good news in terms of providing our county services. And then there are a couple areas where we're helping to support some revenue losses in health. For the health clinics, they've lost about almost $5.3 million in revenues. So that's going to help support that area, as well as recover some gas tax losses at about $1.2 million. So as we move forward, we're trying to maintain our fiscal resilience. We're using our strategic plan and our operational plan to help guide our priorities. We have a continuous process improvement initiative, which is helping to create some efficiencies and make process improvements where we can. We have a performance measurement initiative that we're using to help assess our effectiveness, and we're hoping to roll that out more among departments as we move forward in future fiscal years. We just started to work on program budgeting, and our proposed budget that will come out at the beginning of May is going to highlight this in a couple departments. So you'll be able to see budget information displayed in slightly new ways. And as we move forward, we're hoping that all departments will be able to implement program budgeting and provide some additional detail and clarity on how we spend our money. And then for, like I mentioned, our reserves, we used a significant amount of our reserves in the current fiscal year because of our revenue losses. So we're going to have to work on restoring our reserves over the next 5 to 7 years so that we have that for any future disasters that we may experience.
Nicole, you should begin to wrap up.
Okay, and then in terms of revenue options, we are going to be looking at different revenue options to preserve our services. So this is just to summarize some important dates. May 7th, we'll be publishing our proposed budget online. May 11th, the board accepts the proposed budget, and then June 21st to the 23rd, we have budget hearings, followed by the adoption on June 29th. And then I put my contact information as well as Supervisor Coonerty's in case you have any questions, but that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Nicole. I'm glad there's not a test on this because it's a lot of information. It's very useful. Thank you. Our next speaker is Ryan Coonerty. Ryan represents the 3rd District on the Santa Cruz County Board of Supervisors, and he is a 2-time former mayor of Santa Cruz. He's also an entrepreneur, author, and educator. He hosts a podcast called An Honorable Profession and is a lecturer on law and government at UC Santa Cruz. He co-founded Next Space downtown, a co-working space. He co-authored The Rise of Naked Economy, How to Benefit from the Changing Workplace, and he wrote Etched in Stone, Enduring Words from Our National Monuments. He graduated from public schools in Santa Cruz and the University of Oregon. He has his master's degree from the London School of Economics and a law degree from the University of Virginia Law School. Thank you for joining us, Ryan.
Thank you. So I just want to commend the Democratic Women's Club for putting on an event about this subject. It always surprises me that we will have 50 or 100 people showing up for a non-binding resolution around some federal or state issue, and then we spend $1 billion and no one's in the audience and no one cares. So I think it's incredibly important that that we have this discussion, and I appreciate everyone's participation. Because we've had 28 people sit through more than an hour of discussion on this on Saturday, I thought I'd be brief, but I thought I'd sort of share a little bit of my secrets that I've learned over 15 years in office of how I approach the budget. I do this reluctantly because there are administrators on the phone or on the Zoom call, and there's a natural tension, right? Their job is to stop us from spending money, and our job is to spend money. And you know, everyone has to play their role. But I thought I'd talk you to a little bit about at least what I've learned over my time, because it's really developed as I've gone through this now a couple times. First piece is, you know, I think, and it was captured by all the presentations, is that most of the money that comes to the city or the county is sort of earmarked or can only be spent on certain things in certain ways. And so the city doesn't have, or the elected officials don't have a lot of ability to change that. But what we can do is make sure, from my perspective, that it's spent in a smart and sensible way. And this has been my mantra to department heads and administrative officers since I first got elected, which is, don't show me like that you added one full-time equivalent person in a year or reduce them by half a full-time equivalent in a year. Like, tell me what you do, what your goal was, how close you came to achieving it. And if you've achieved all your goals, I'm going to be furious, because that means you set low goals. If you don't have goals, I'm going to be furious because you didn't set goals, and I don't know how to judge whether you spent the $50 or $100 million well or not well on behalf of our citizens. And then finally, like, there should be a mix. I want you to try, push. I understand you're going to fail. If you come forward, I'm not going to call you out or embarrass you for failing, because I want I want your departments to try things and take risks. And so, but I want to know what you're doing. And I think finally, after many, many years, we have if you go to the county website that Nicole showed, we now have like 187 metrics across every department and indicators that show whether we're reaching those goals or aren't reaching those goals, whether we're changing those goals. And really the budget discussion is less about the particular numbers on a page, but how we're doing and moving in that direction. The second role you play, so that's sort of the broad oversight role you play. The second role you play is really in establishing programs. And so this is in my time on the board. This year we established the Office of Recovery, Resilience, and Response, which is basically after the fires, it became clear to us that this is going to be our new reality going forward, and that we needed an office dedicated to both responding and recovering, but also building resilience and attracting federal or state grant dollars, private grant dollars, working with neighborhoods and private property owners or nonprofits. And so we put that in the budget, and it's a pretty significant amount of money, but we think it's going to get paid back both in better services, less damage to our community, and then hopefully attracting the grant dollars. Previously, I focused on sort of the intersection of public safety and mental health, substance abuse, and we created the FIT program, which is a program where we have sheriff's deputies partnered with mental health workers patrolling across the county, but including into the city, to address your sort of high level, impactful offenders. And then we have the PAC program, which is a specialized court for low level chronic offenders, basically the small number of people that can cause a disproportionate amount of harm in our community. And so that was working with a bunch of different departments. And then finally, the thing that I'm most always happy about is the Thrive by 3 program. When I got to the board, we spent a huge amount of money on the back end on, whether it was mental health or jail or substance abuse. We spent very little money on moms and babies in those first couple years of life, when 85% of the brains of a child's brain is developed. Any traumas that happen during that time can have a lifelong impact. Any positive events can have a lifelong impact. And so we invested dollars, and now it's up to well over $1 million a year, where we're helping low-income first-time moms and their babies with everything from counseling to breastfeeding to literacy, to health and immunizations, to all the things that will getting the child signed up for preschool, all the things that will, I think, have a generational impact. And so those programs, I think elected officials can play a key role in convening people, and then putting the program together, and then making sure the funding's in those programs. As an aside, those programs almost always start as pilots, because frankly, the administrators know that they're going, if they're established as a stay along as an ongoing program, that will have significant budget implications over time. But they also know that if you get the program established and if it's moderately successful, it's going to be built in the budget. So there's a lot of resistance, let's just say, from administrators or questions that come in. And but if you want, you can build a constituency among staff and community members and your fellow board members, and you can get it passed. Lastly is sort of one-time money, and this is like the Rescue Act. As Nicole said, we got about $53 million. Supervisor Fred and I came together and said, let's think about, in addition to all the things that the staff identified that we needed to do for COVID recovery and backfilling and all that, how do we want to make investments in the future? And so we came up with a $1.2 million spending package, $500,000 to expand broadband access, because we saw the disparities during COVID for both education and workers in our community. $300,000 to expand apprenticeship programs for the trades, because we're seeing now, as people are trying to build 900 plus homes in San Lorenzo Valley and Bonnie Doon, that we just don't have enough people who know how to do construction to do that work, or to build affordable housing projects we want to build. And that's a good way to create a pipeline of the trained people we need, but it's also a good way to create, good paying blue collar jobs in our community so that people can live and work in our community. And then lastly, $400,000 to support small businesses that are particularly with a focus on women-owned, minority-owned, or cultural institutions. And the idea being that those particular populations and small businesses got hammered by COVID. And by partnering with outside groups, we can create some support, maybe loan programs, other programs that will get those businesses either continue to be operating or get new businesses established. And so I think there's that opportunity there. Finally, and I think this is my little secret for the aspiring elected officials in the audience. So I sort of think about it when I was at the city. My rule of thumb was being an elected official is a real pain in the ass, and that these are big budgets, and that I should spend at least 100 in a normal year. I sort of have $100,000 that I should add to the budget in the ways that I want, because doing this work is really hard, and I have a pulse on the community, and that's how I want to do it. At the county, that number I've moved it up to $400,000 a year. It's a $1 billion budget and $400,000 a year. Unless it's a really bad year, I try to direct either to programs that I like the Thrive by 3 or the OR3 or FIT or PACT, or one-off programs. We need a safe crossing at Davenport across from Wales City, and we start to put together the funding that makes us better able to compete for Caltrans dollars. And so, I don't know if this would happen if every elected official came forward with that much money, because then it starts to add up into real money. But I always sort of have that, I sort of come in with that mindset that this is a big budget, and in my district, I need to fight for X amount of dollars or X amount of projects a year coming in. And so, I think that as a rule of thumb for elected officials is not a bad way to approach it, which is overall focus on the overall performance. It's a $1 billion budget, 2,400 employees at the county. Let's make sure that what they do every day is impactful and done well. Let's fund some programs that address specific emerging needs in our community, or sort of middle to long-term investments. Let's do these one-offs of programs that need where we need the money to be spent, and let's figure out what that looks like. And so anyway, so I think that's how I sort of approach the budget every year. I think we've now at the county gone to a 2-year budget, which is better, because often we're having the same arguments for what was largely a status quo budget. And so I think having a 2-year budget where you can see things play out a little bit more is a good idea. There you go.
Thank you, Ryan. Awesome. Okay, we're going to move to questions and answers, and I'm going to start with ones in the chat. Mike, well, maybe I'll start with you.
Oh, you can start the chat. Go ahead. I'll wait.
Okay. The first one, this is just a show of hands. How many of you realized that the Santa Cruz County Works was sold to HuffPost for $1.9 billion on April 1st? April Fools. I've missed that too, but I don't know who posted that, Ryan, but wouldn't that be nice? The next real question is from Desiree Carter. Living in an unincorporated area, will there be money to build infrastructure in these areas, like moving electrical lines underground for fire safety?
So I think I'll just answer that, which is, I think, this is one of those areas where there's this categorical approach. So PG&E sets a certain amount of money aside. They have a whole program for underlining these lines. It takes decades for them to acquire enough money to do a small stretch of roads. And then you apply and you compete and then you move forward. And so, that's an example where there are things we can do for resilience with our general fund dollars, or as we do a roads project or otherwise. But otherwise, we're really at the mercy of these sort of state funds that are, there are these categorical funds that come down, of which there's only a small percentage that can be deployed, and so it becomes we're all in a waiting game for undergrounding in a way that and it used to be until this year, all undergrounding money sort of went to the highest density commercial areas or as a priority. Now they've switching it to the rural areas, but obviously undergrounding that is miles and miles of undergrounding, and that has costs, so it takes time.
Thank you. Brett Garrett asked a question about dollars being set aside in both city and county to help fund a viability study for a regional public bank, which could help with long-term recovery efforts. I'm not sure if you're seeing this in the chat, Ryan and Nicole, and I'm assuming this would be at the county level, but maybe the city as well, Donna and Martine.
It would be both, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think this is an example. I'll just say, I think a public bank is certainly worth investigating. From what I understand, it needs to be broader than just our county. So the way to come forward is to get all the responsible local governments to all agree to fund their share based on population. And then the ask becomes more reasonable, and it's an ability to, you start to build that constituency, that interest, because if whatever it is, the county of Santa Clara is not interested in spending $25,000 to look at the viability, that probably means they're not with the size of their budget, that probably means they're not interested, right? So this is it's a good way that the budget process tests people's interests in moving a project forward. So you pick your area, figure out what the division would be by population or budget size or whatever it is you want to divide it by, and then start advocating that each community put in a certain amount of money in their budget. And the more that one elected official says, well, there's 11 other communities that are all moving forward, that helps give them confidence to put it in their budget to be the 12th community.
Donna, do you have anything to add to that from the city's point of view?
Yeah, the city did adopt a resolution last year, it was maybe a year and a half ago, supporting public banks. So the city of Santa Cruz is on record as supporting these institutions, but operationalizing them is still under development in terms of state law and other things. But we are on record as being supportive of such an institution in Santa Cruz City.
Thank you. Abby's got a question on chat, but Mike, I'll let you go and then I'll ask Abby's.
So my question, it's mainly to the public officials, Donna and Ryan, but the staff may also have comments on this. Could you give us some idea of how much money is available for funding homeless programs of one kind or another, either social services for homeless or actual shelters and so forth? How much is available, and how does that compare to the scale of what's needed to try and address this program? I'm not looking for exact dollars as much as a sort of sense of where we're at. Do we have some hope that this thing can be addressed with the available funding, or how much more would we have to really make a difference? Because and this affects the city of Santa Cruz, but it involves both county funding, which there's actually a lot more at the county than the city. So I'm curious how you see that picture, where how can we be optimistic that there's a way we can actually get on top of this problem, or is it really beyond our reach, and there has to be some federal program to make this happen?
Sure. So I'll give you, so there are tens of millions of dollars a year in Santa Cruz County between the cities and the counties that is spent on homelessness. It comes in these tranches. So you get money for Project Room Key, which is just for setting up, putting people in hotel rooms, or Home Key, which is buying hotels. Or there's workforce training or other programs. And so they tend to be very categorical based. Right now, the thing the county is struggling with is we have about 650 people in hotels that are being paid for by essentially COVID FEMA funds. And in September, all that money runs out. So while the community, I think, is having a really good conversation about how do we house all the people we see who are currently unhoused, the county is scrambling to try to prevent 650 people who are currently housed from being added to the street. who had, reached some stability going forward. And that's going to cost us $5 million, I believe. I think we're spending just to try to find housing for those folks. That's the real answer to your question is no. I mean, I think people call and they're like, oh, we need to set something up at the fairgrounds. So when we had the camp in San Lorenzo Park, it's $200,000 a month for 100 people, 80 people. We have almost 3,000 homeless people. So if you start doing the math, and if you really want to get them into housing, it's billions and billions and billions of dollars. It would take all the entire county budget and the entire city budget for several years. Even if you could find the land, build the housing, have the supportive housing, et cetera, just to house our current population. And that would be defunding everything else. And the other part of it is that, this is the hard part about is that we can use our affordable housing dollars. We can prevent people from who may be losing their housing with they may need rent support or relocation or other support. We can build affordable housing for teachers, service workers, farm workers. It all comes out of the same bucket. So it is an extremely expensive. LA has $1 billion a year budget, and they're seeing double-digit increases every year. And
$1 billion on homelessness, not the overall budget.
Yeah. The LA has $1 billion a year, and I think San Francisco County has an $800 million a year budget, and they're seeing double-digit increases every year. And we don't have those revenue streams. So the problem is enormous and cannot be served at the state and local level. And I see, in the chat that that it's we're trying to house people, but again, we have 650 people that are being housed, and all that funding runs out in September. So we're trying to find funding for those people, plus new people or existing people, plus trying to balance other needs and other populations in this community that also need support.
Yeah, Mike,
Donna, did you?
I don't have a whole lot to add to that. I mean, I think that this is a federal crisis. Obviously, a federal dollar goes a lot. It doesn't go as long in California as it does practically in any other state. That's going to be a big problem, and I think the state has to also rectify a lot of disinvestment following, frankly, a lot of laws that we've passed by the voters over the last couple of decades. And we really aren't acknowledging a couple of big things that are happening just from the community and societal perspective, which is we do have a mental health crisis. It's growing. It's documented. COVID will certainly add to that. And so we're really not investing into the areas where we can potentially give people the tools and the resources they need. Substance abuse is another area where it's very disinvested in. So these kinds of things are not able to, really create a productive and balanced life for someone. And so when you have people suffering from these kinds of things, even if you were able to build everyone a house, it's not necessarily that someone's going to be able to succeed once they get into the house, or if the services are going to be broad enough. So it's really both a societal disinvestment in people who are unfortunately suffering from various things that we just as a society have said, you're on your own, good luck, combined with not enough money for the actual infrastructure and other things that we would really need to be put into place. So it's, I agree with Ryan, it's a federal issue, but unfortunately, I don't know how we solve it because of the cost of building right now in California and the kinds of laws that we have with regards to how we plan for housing in California. So I think a lot of it is really management. It's really around management now, not about solving homelessness. I don't think we're anywhere close to solving homelessness. But we do have to acknowledge sort of the community as a whole in terms of how we approach managing homelessness. And for those folks who will accept help and want to move out of certain situations, we have to do a better job of collectively providing some of those management tools, which I think is really where we're starting to focus on as a city because of some of the impacts and the costs. But Martine can say more about this, but the city receives very little money. A lot of the resources that we spend really come out of our general fund, and those are things that's funds that we're using that we can't use in other needs in terms of our general fund. So we don't have any direct, very little bit of direct allocation coming from state and federal sources.
And Mike, let me just add, because and I hate to be the downer here, but so there was a study done 2 years ago that to house the 30,000 homeless people, permanently housed 30,000 homeless people in the Bay Area, it would cost $12.7 billion. And given, as Donna said, the cost of construction and the increased number of homeless, I would guess that's up to $17 billion. And so if you do that, we're a little less than 10% of that. That's what, $1.6 billion to address that issue. And that's assuming we have land and can site it and everything else. So the scope of the problem is so enormous that it's a national crisis that needs to be solved. It's been left to the local governments to try to piece together the response. But if we're spending tens of millions of dollars and we need to spend billions of dollars, you can see why we're struggling so much to respond.
I will say a huge amount of debate goes on in the community over solutions that are completely infeasible, given that that's useful, very useful information, because I don't think the public's quite aware of that at all. And there's a sense of like, somebody's just fallen down on the job and that this could all be fixed in some nobody thinks it's easy, but that it could be fixed in the short term with some really good ideas, and they have an idea of the way to fix it. But there's a disconnect between the possibility of fixing it given the resources available. And I thought Donna's answer on this was really helpful. It's at this point, we can do something about how to manage it and make some hard decisions about those kinds of questions, but that's very different than let's house all these people in a decent place to live. And the cost it's not, I have a lot of ideas about how it could be fixed. And if we had the right priorities on taxes and spending at the federal level, we'd have the resources to do it. But local government's not going to fix this problem without a major federal commitment to do something real about it.
Thank you.
Can I add something just real quick?
Sure.
Just a little bit of optimism, I guess. So I think I agree with everything that was said with respect to the fact that we're not really going to make a difference until there's massive reforms and influx of funds to address the issue from the feds and states. But there are some examples, and the one that you can look towards is, for example, New York State. They have about 130,000 homeless people about 95,000 in New York State. California has about 130,000 homeless. But when you look at the level of unsheltered, New York State has only 5% of their homeless population of that 130,000 is unsheltered. California is closer to 70%, which is why it's very visible. And so they've developed a statewide sheltering system, which has at least addressed the issue of the unhoused out in the streets part of it.
Let's say the tent issue is a way of looking at visual.
Exactly. So they just have a statewide coordinated sheltering system that's comprehensive, and at least again gets people into shelter and then gets them on a path to improving their lives. We just don't have that in California, so it's much more visible here and much more impactful on a day-to-day level.
Thanks, Martine, for adding that. I want to ask Abby Young's question. And she was directing this to Supervisor Coonerty, but I think this whole conversation follows up. She wants to find out about the $8 million ESG funds for emergency shelter and rehousing that was just received. Of this amount, 100% was given to rehousing and 0% allocated to emergency shelter. How do you reconcile this with the urgent need for emergency shelter to create city-county partnerships and address the humanitarian crisis in our county and prevent the increased wildfire danger from unmanaged camping in our wildland urban interface?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, so there's a couple parts to it. One is most housing funds aren't determined, and this is this is the issue of budgeting and governance, is it comes through a coordinated system of the cities and the counties and the homeless, and it also involves service providers. So by the time it gets to us, it's primarily a recommendation. So it's like a rubber stamp that the county makes, the board of supervisors make. But I think it's that tension, right? Of like, if we don't spend it on rehousing, then we're going to add 650 people to the streets to what is an already crisis. Or you can spend it on the people who are on the streets, and then in September, when the federal fund money runs out, the people who are in the hotels move on to the streets. So it's like you're moving it around and trying to find resources that can address it. The other part I will say is that I also think what I'm looking for is a model coming out of this where it's a real focused on helping people navigate to somewhere, helping them reconnect to families or reconnect to communities where they have a better chance. Because if we build 100 shelter beds and people spend a year there, we built 100 shelter beds. If we build 100 shelter beds and people spend 2 months there, we built 600 shelter beds. And so what I am focused on this new money on is how much churn can we create in terms of getting people to solutions, getting people connected to family or whatever they need to do, frankly, to get people to other communities where the cost of housing is not as high and there is a better chance that you can find a job that can pay for that housing. Because doing it in this community, given our jobs base and our housing base, is essentially impossible for people with PhDs and holding multiple jobs. It's essentially impossible if you've spent 10 years living on the street, battled substance abuse and have a criminal record and everything else. So what I'm hoping what this program will do is help us better create a case management and housing navigation system that gets people out of homelessness faster and into better solutions.
Let me follow on with a question sort of related to that. The housing costs are just off the charts. Hundreds of thousands of dollars over asking price in a matter of hours or days. That's got to impact our bottom line in property tax revenue. Are we thinking about allocating that money? I mean, it's just an outrageous amount, unless it's being capped by the new proposition that lets people carry their property taxes with them. Isn't this a new boon of money for the county and city?
So, I mean, Nicole can give you the hard numbers. So the challenge is the county only gets 13 cents of every dollar of property tax. I think San Mateo County gets 43 cents of every dollar. So when you look at the disparities in funding,
Prop 13.
Yeah. So if you look at disparities in funding, that's a challenge. And then while our numbers are going up, in part, it's because we have relatively few sales. So we need a lot of houses to churn in order to get the appraisals and have people not carry their property tax with them from other places. And so it certainly has helped our budget reduce some of the hits we've taken from less hotel tax and less sales tax and all that. But it hasn't been meaningful enough to create new money in our budgets.
Yeah, I can add to that, Ryan. So as a whole, the county receives $504 million from property taxes. 57% of that goes to the schools. So the far majority goes to fund schools. As Ryan said, we get, as a county, 13% of that amount. So we get about almost $58 million. In cities, all 4 cities in the county only get about 5% of that amount. So and then the rest of it goes to fire and some other agencies. So you can kind of see how it's spread among all the agencies. Even though we've seen property taxes go up, we're averaging about 3 to 4% right now as a county in terms of our revenue growth from property taxes. Most likely because there is very limited supply in terms of what's turning over. That what is turning over is going up, but as a whole, we're not seeing a lot of turnover because there's so little supply. So that kind of gives you some perspective.
And help me understand why we get such a smaller amount of the dollar,
13.
13 over versus 43, for instance.
Prop 13,
It's just because it's more recent sales.
just because of recent, yes. Well, so, we've historically only gotten 13% because that's, when they froze the taxes in the system in time, that's been our what we've received as a county historically is about 13 cents on the dollar.
We used to get like closer to like 60% of it, 60% of the money until 1978 when Prop 13 passed and the money went to the state and got redistributed in the ways that were just described.
Correct.
I think the city gets around 16% of our property tax, because property tax just doesn't go to the city, it goes to schools, it goes to the county, it goes to other agencies as well. Similarly, the sales tax, we only get a small portion of the sales tax. People think we get the whole amount, but same with property tax, and it's capped in terms of its growth, and it's a stable, revenue source, but it's not one that generates a lot of increases on a year-to-year basis, even though the real estate market is, as you described, right, really, with multiple offers and prices are really high.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily reflect in our budgets.
I might add, it failed in the last election, but there was a split tax roll measure on the ballot that would have over half the property in California is commercial or industrial property, and they have the same benefits as homeowners. Prop 13 was sold as a way to help seniors who were had problems paying their property taxes, but it actually would have passed. It covered all taxes, property tax in the state. There was an attempt to do a split tax roll where they would keep those protections for residences, but allow the actual tax rates to go up along with the value throughout the state on industrial and commercial property. And it was close, but it failed in the last election. And I'm sure that'll be tried again because it's a real key to like making that fund raise enough money to make a difference of the kind that the question implies.
Another question would be about, are we considering in any way merging municipal services, sheriff and police, fire, anything across the unincorporated in the cities?
So we have seen a couple of significant fire mergers. We saw UCSC and the city come together, and we just had Central and La Selva Fire come together. I think we are looking at more shared services, certainly, because there's economies of scale in places where you can get economies of scale. I think it makes tons of sense. The reality is, right, the entire county is a third the size of the city of San Jose. There's no reason why we need whatever it is, 13 fire districts and 15 school districts and everything else. We could find scales. It's figuring out how to merge those things together in a way that makes sense.
Would it be possible to get the police and sheriff to merge? That would be a loaded one, wouldn't it?
And I think that becomes a question of local communities and if they're comfortable, losing their police departments and contracting with the sheriff. I know some jurisdictions have had to contemplate that. For instance, Scotts Valley, before they passed their sales tax increase, I think that was an option that they may have had to pursue had that sales tax increase not passed, would be to contract with the sheriff, that there was a strong desire to maintain their police department.
Yeah, you do see in more rural or residential type neighborhoods, smaller cities, contract out with sheriffs. Typically larger cities or cities that are like us that are, have all the, we're sort of the center of the cultural center, the governmental center, the county seat. Typically cities like Santa Cruz, we're more like San Jose and LA and San Francisco. they tend to have their own police departments just because we just tend to have a lot of more, criminal justice and public safety issues. Whereas, a more suburban community, with the sheriff, answering calls and patrolling here and there is more doable typically.
Okay, thank you. Raise your hand or please chat if you've got questions. Desiree asks, what is the federal government doing to help the state with the houseless people? Do you know of big programs coming down?
There's
We're
500
getting funding.
500 million. Go ahead, Ryan. Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I mean, the reality is, so we're getting money. It's coming in tens of millions of dollars when, as we said, we needed to come in the billions of dollars. So, there's certainly new programs. It's certainly been helped by the new administration, who is making a commitment to invest in communities. I don't know if people realize, but under the Trump administration, no community under I think it was 400,000 got any help during COVID. So as we're trying to be the front line of response and deal with an economic crisis and business shutdowns and everything else, I think it's incredibly, and we essentially got nothing and we're left on our own. Now we have the federal government making investments, but again, the size and scale of the investment that's needed for homelessness is an order of magnitude bigger than what we're currently talking about.
Donna, did you want to add to that?
No, I think Ryan covered it. I mean, I think that the Biden administration certainly has their eye on it. Again, I think that, putting money into the system in California to solve homelessness is basically just pouring money down the drain. I mean, the state does not have a comprehensive plan to address homelessness. It's tied to mental health, behavioral health, substance abuse treatment. So, money would hit and it would probably go towards the things that Ryan has already mentioned. But again, it's just a drop in a bucket compared to the things that the needs. So really, I think what has to happen is there has to be an acknowledgement at the federal level of the societal issues that I mentioned earlier, which is we have a growing mental health and behavioral health crisis in the country. We have substance abuse issues that continue to go untreated and most people cannot access because they can't afford to go into a treatment center. So they're left, with public resources to do that. And so until we sort of put the pieces together of the causes, and then of course, poverty, decade-old poverty and lack of investment in affordable housing, it's all, we're living in the perfect storm right now. It's all come together over the last 60 years and here we are. So pouring money on the problem is literally pouring money into a hole until we really put together that full suite of structural need on a sort of public basis.
Laura Lee, we have about 3 minutes left.
And I have a hand raised with Carol. Thank you. Carol, do you want to try to do that very quickly? And unmute.
Well, just briefly, while Carol's unmuting, there was an article in Forbes that I think hits on, I don't agree with 100% of it, but I agree with like 90% of it, that hits on the points that Donna's making about how broken our systems are. And if you don't fix mental health and substance abuse and coordination in the criminal justice system, you're going to spend a lot of resources pouring good money after bad, trying to address homelessness. And so it's a good study and check it out.
Thanks. And Ryan posted that in the chat and Carol's still on mute. So we're just going to go on, Carol. I don't know how to unmute, Carol.
I'm unmuting. Yeah.
There you are.
Yeah, sorry. I wanted to know from Martine, I've just anecdotally seen a lot of people in town on the weekends. I mean, I'm now avoiding the freeway and avoiding, on weekends. Are you actually seeing a measurable increase in TOT or sales tax or visitors related to visitors in the revenue side?
We are seeing more, definitely there's more visitors, particularly in recent weeks. That's clear. We haven't seen it yet reflected in it precisely in our revenues yet. I assume there will be some But then we get those on a quarterly basis, so we don't have the actual numbers, but we should see some of that. I don't know about TOT. I think, the day visitors seem to be increasing, coming down to the beach and coming down to the boardwalk, but how that reflects with respect to, spending or staying overnight. I don't know if that's gone up to where it used to be. And then also, obviously, there's also the international and out-of-state travel that is probably not at the same level that it used to be. So that's going to take some time to recover. And then obviously the spending at restaurants and retail has been really hit really, really hard. People might come to the beach, but not necessarily, go out and eat or limit that a bit further. So we'll see in the coming months. It is, starting to get busier, and I'm sure there will be a recovery and the numbers will go up, but whether they'll be at the same level as they were before the pandemic, we'll have to wait and see.
Thank you. We do have 1 minute, Mike. So just want to quickly wrap up and say this was very informative. I think we all learned a lot. Now we know new resources to go to, and we now can show up at the meetings and advocate more intelligently. So thank you for helping us with that. I want to let you mark your calendars. We have a fundraiser for Congressman Jimmy Panetta on May 6th. It's Zoom virtual. You can find information on our Democratic Women's Club website. And our next forum will be on affordable housing, which sort of is a takeoff of this discussion. That'll be on May 15th. So please add that to your calendar. So appreciate all the time and effort, particularly Nicole and Martine and Donna and Ryan. The work you've done to put together your PowerPoints and presentation were tremendous. So thank you. And a little bit of a hand clap virtually for you for that. Mike, did you have any closing comment as we sign off?
No, I know a lot about budgets, and I found this extremely informative for myself. So I assume others that knew even less than I did have learned a bunch here. And you can't get into this process of making a difference if you don't understand how the city and county budgets work. It's a key document for understanding what's possible and what you might be able to make some difference in. Today's presentation, I think, was very helpful in that regard. Thank you all.
Thank you.
And this has been recorded, and you'll be able to find a link on our website for this if other people want to listen and watch. Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
we're going to end this call in just a moment here. Everybody stay safe.
Thank you very much.
Bye.